probably don't hear it enough, but the point is... Thank you.
See that? Isn't that beautiful? Doesn't it hit you in the feels? You see, I've realized that the problem with Bridget Jones Mad About the Boy, which is a problem that actually cuts across the entire Bridget Jones franchise as a whole, is that Bridget Jones spends too much time focusing on the romance when it can be so much more. Yes, people, I finally made it to the end of the Bridget Jones movie franchise, or at least the end for now. We don't know if in another 5 years we'll be blessed with Bridget once again trying to navigate life and romance to some disastrous and occasionally hilarious results. Now, ever since I started yapping about these series of film, I've not made it a secret about how I'm not the biggest fan of the series. Just because, like I said in previous videos with Bridget Jones, for the longest time, I considered it just a filmography of the humiliation ritual that is dating for women. And although I'd said that Bridget Jones's Baby was my favorite in the series as at when I talked about it last week, I think I'm ready to change my mind again. The fourth installment in the franchise, aka Mad About the Boy, is undisputedly my favorite in the series. I know it's not because Mark Darcy is no longer in the picture, but because with this film, I realized what has actually been at the root of my dissatisfaction with these movies. But before I go into further details on that, you know how we do it. Please settle in and let me give you a not so quick synopsis of the film. The movie starts in a way vastly dissimilar from the previous film in the series. Mark Darcy is dead. He's been dead for the last 4 years, leaving Bridget a widow who has to raise their 2 children, Billy and Mabel, alone. Well, not alone, because Bridget has gathered quite the crew in her corner, friends and former colleagues who love her and are willing to offer her the support she needs. And then there is Daniel Cleaver, who for the first time in 4 films, I actually ended up really liking in this one. But yeah, it's been 4 years. Mark Darcy is dead and Bridget has to leave home to endure an evening of what ideally should be the goodwill of those who knew her late husband in a celebration of his life, but which in turn becomes an evening of them basically being nosy as hell as they try to get her to get back to dating again, with a couple of ageist and misogynistic remarks tossed into the mix. And exhausted Bridget gets back home to her kids, who had been watched over by Daniel, who is still sleazy, but in a way that is more default than him actually trying to hit on her. And there's the fondness of years gone by and the support he now offers her as a trusted friend, trying his best to be there for Bridget and her kids. After sending him off, Bridget talks in her kids, and as she does so, she continues to imagine that Mark is right there, singing and comforting them alongside her in a way that just makes my heart ache. Because if you're someone who's lost someone close to you, you know how after the years have gone by, it slowly wears out the pain, but you're left with the loneliness of their absence and have those moments of imagining how life would be if they were still there, doing the little things you'd always taken for granted whilst they were around. Anyway, Bridget tucks in her kids, sings them to sleep using the song Mark used to sing to Billy because Mabel was a baby when Mark passed. Of course, before she puts them to bed, we get a moment where the family of 3 look at a white owl that sits outside their window practically on a nightly basis, which the kids kind of take to mean that their father is watching over them through the owl. I agree. Anyway, school's back in session and Bridget has to take her kids to school in a way that is chaotic and messy and so quintessential Bridget that it makes me smile. She's harried and rushed, but still able to get her kids to school, where she meets new science teacher with a whistle from hell, Scott Walliker, played by the delectable Chiwetel Ejiofor, which yum. Anyway, Mr. Walliker is a hard ass, blasting whistles all day, chasing the kids and keeping them in line, and not giving a rat's ass of respect to perfect Nicolette, one of the other moms in the school with her perfect sons and perfect life, who Bridget is jealous of. Bridget's life is most certainly not perfect. Matter of fact, from what we've experienced in the 3 previous films, we are all quite familiar with how decidedly not perfect Bridget Jones is. And things are even worse now that she's lost Mark, as she's had to quit work following his death to be present for and to take care of their kids. A situation that is now driving her to the wall, as she doesn't even have a moment of silence to herself whilst raising two rambunctious children all by herself. Her friends do pop in, of course, to give her moments of respite. But Bridget is clearly struggling and things have ground to a halt for her. What makes matters worse, of course, is the fact that everyone and their mother has advice to give Bridget about what her next steps should be. And if they were all united on their thoughts, maybe it would be easier for her to decide on things, but they aren't. All their advice contradicts one another and Bridget is stuck. What helps her become unstuck, however, is her remembering her late father. Yes, Papa Jones is gone. Damn. This film's just offing everyone and my heart hurts. Anyway, Papa Jones, before he passed, urged Bridget to live. Truly live. And Dr. Rollins encourages Bridget to get her ass up and go back to work. Dr. Rollins. Thank you for still blessing us with your gorgeous, stunning self. Emma Thompson, leave Greg and marry me. Anyway, whilst Emma considers my plea, back to the film. After Bridget helps Miranda for her show's interview segment and realizes that she still got it, she agrees to Miranda's plea and comes to the Better Woman set, where Richard's still a creep but is absolutely delighted to have her and hires her on the spot after declaring that she's the best producer he's ever worked with. Go, Bridget! Bridget finally finds her way back to work and is killing it, especially thanks to the aid of fabulous nanny Chloe, who is so damn good at her job that Bridget is legit terrified that she's about to be replaced by her in the minds of her kids. But as I was saying, Bridget is killing it at work and also killing it in love. After an unfortunate moment of her being trapped up in a tree as she tried to rescue her kids who had climbed up said tree and were too terrified to climb back down, who comes to the rescue? Not one, but two men. The first is Scott Walliker, who is content to smirk at Bridget's attempt to cover up the fact that she's stuck. And next up is Park Ranger Roxter McDuff, a 29-year-old charmer who gets Bridget and her kids down the tree, spots the Tinder profile that Miranda had set up for Bridget and swipes right on her so that they can start a bit of an online dating thing. After meeting up and having quite the weekend of scorching hot sex, the type that everyone could tell that Bridget was definitely getting some, she and Roxter officially start dating, with him showing up at her home and Mabel starts referring to him as her new daddy, to the displeasure of Billy, who is still coping with his father's passing and is not so pleased to see his father replaced. Plus, to make matters worse, a science assignment where Billy had kind of implied that there was a heaven beyond the stratosphere had Scott giving him a low score. At a class presentation where the parents show up to talk about their professions, when it gets to Bridget's turn to show the class what her job as a television producer is like, she sees it as an opportunity to challenge Scott's views about life after death and if all living creatures have souls. The conversation doesn't go as Bridget wants, however, and Billy is still crushed. We fast forward a bit into the future and it's Talitha's birthday. Talitha is Miranda's co-host on Better Woman and as such, one of the women in the studio that Bridget is tight with. Anyway, all her friends are excited to see this dashing younger man that Bridget's been dating, and Rockstar does not disappoint, diving into the pool to save his swimming dog, stripping his wet shirt to show abs, and kissing Bridget to the delight of all her friends. Everything seems absolutely perfect until Rockstar makes an offhand comment about wishing it had a time machine, which absolutely gives him away as actually having a problem with the age gap between Bridget and himself. By the next morning, when Bridget wakes up, Rockstar's gone and, like a fucking child, chooses to ghost her. After Bridget realizes what is happening and her numerous unanswered messages confirm the truth of things, she tries moving on. In the midst of this, Daniel has a heart attack scare that hospitalizes him. Thankfully, he's okay, but he tells Bridget that the experience has shown him just how alone he is, as when he was asked for a next of kin, the only person he could think of who would actually show up for him is Bridget. Hell, even Enzo, his 15-year-old son, is someone he hasn't seen in over a decade. Bridget tells him that she would give anything to be able to spend more time with her now deceased father, and encourages Daniel to reconnect with his son. Time continues moving forward. Bridget is still killing it at work when Rockstar shows up with pie to apologize to Bridget, telling her that although he had been scared initially, he is now ready to fully commit to her and her kids, and asks her to take him back. Bridget admits that she too wished that she had a time machine so that they could actually be together and the years wouldn't matter, but she doesn't. And although Rockstar is amazing, she can't be with him. When she gets back home, she writes her letter to Mark, and together with the kids on the next morning, which is Mark's birthday, they go to the park with balloons containing their messages to him, art from the kids, and letter from Bridget. They release the balloons. It's a beautiful tradition and shows just how much they all mix Mark. And God, I wanted to strangle him so badly in the previous films, but now this film kept having me bawl my eyes out for Mark Darcy. Damn it. Anyway, Billy's class goes to Lakeland, and Bridget is one of the parents who signed on to chaperone and help with the process. She's paired up with Scott, and they have a great time with Scott, amazed at how well Bridget is with the kids. And after they've had some alone time at the bonfire post-gooey marshmallow dinner, Bridget asks Scott if he's ever had any kids, to which Scott tells her that he never had the time. Billy comes out to tell Bridget that one of his classmates needs music to fall asleep to, and Bridget leaves to do her thing, whilst Billy is able to sit with Scott and admits to him that what he is most terrified of is forgetting his father. And my heart just broke. Scott tells him that Mark is everywhere. Energy, after all, can't be destroyed. It's simply transformed from one form to another. But most importantly, Mark is in Billy and Mabel, and there's absolutely no way Billy would forget his father. If any of you think that it seems quite sudden for Scott to have this turnaround, it's because earlier on we had a moment during the parent-teacher meeting when Scott explains his concerns about Billy having been withdrawn to Bridget in a way that already shows that he might be quite attached to the whistle, but he really does notice and cares for his students. Anyway, at the school winter pageant, Billy, with the help of his class, sings a song as a tribute to Mark, and Bridget cries and also sees a mirage of Mark looking on and looking quite proud of his son. She thanks Scott for helping her son heal, for the care he extends to his students, and for showing that it's okay for them to live at the same time as the things and people they've lost, and that it's okay to learn to be happy without them. She tells him that they are all heading to the pub afterwards and that he can join them if he wants. Bridget is hanging with her friends at said pub when she notices Scott, who shows up at the door but doesn't come in and instead chooses to walk away. She goes chasing after him. I mean, is it a Bridget Jones movie if Bridget isn't running after the man that she wants? But as I was saying, she goes running after him after Billy points out the direction in which he went to and catches up with Scott, who confesses that he's drawn to her and starts to ramble, at which point she kisses him so that he will stop rambling and spiraling. A year later, it's New Year's Eve, and Bridget has family and friends over for the New Year's Eve party at her home. Everyone's present, including now 16-year-old Enzo, who is just as big a flirt as his father, and Scott, who is very much together with and living with Bridget. After the party ends, Bridget and the kids notice the owl who is back, and Scott, who is just as amazed, sees the owl too. She tucks the kid in, and she and Scott kiss as the credits roll. Honestly, a part of me actively hoped that this is the last Bridget Jones film, not because I think it was bad. Like I said earlier in the video, it's my absolute favorite of the films in the series by a mile, but because I think it's a beautiful conclusion and it's a great place for us to drop the curtains on Bridget and her shenanigans. Now, like I said at the start of the video, the reason why this film is my favorite is because I finally realized what the problem I have with this series of films has been, and honestly, it is threefold. The first, I think this film franchise suffers from being put in the wrong subgenre. Marketing for Bridget Jones tells us that this is a romantic comedy, which is something I've always been stuck on because we don't get as much romance, and the comedy has always been at the detriment of Bridget in a way that I never really enjoyed. But honestly, I think that the Bridget Jones films would have been better served if they had been allowed to just be what they are, which isn't a rom-com with an insistence of love triangles that frustrate me to no end and doesn't really serve the plot, but instead this film should have been approached as a chick flick. The Bridget Jones books are often categorized as chick lit, not just merely romance books, because whilst the romance is important for Bridget and chick lit as a whole, it isn't what is at the core of the story like a traditional romance. This story is more about Bridget, about her coming into her own and how she navigates work and life and familiar pressure with the loves that pull her every which way. That's what the series of films have been about. The romance don't matter as much as it's a story of Bridget and who she is, and her romances are just a part of that. And I think that is something that the movies kind of lose the plot on. Now, I'm not saying that some rom-coms don't fall on that chick flick and some chick flicks can be romantic comedy, but chick flicks don't automatically equate to romantic comedies. And I think that is something that the Bridget Jones franchise totally missed and ignored. Which then led me to the second problem for me, which is the fact that because Bridget Jones Mad About the Boy is so desperate to be seen as a romantic comedy and desperately wants to fit into that particular box, the film keeps insisting on having romance be a part of its core story when I personally don't think it's as important. I wish that Bridget Jones Mad About the Boy had instead focused quite extensively on her family, her children, and her career as she tries to navigate them now that her grief has gone from being something that is raw and debilitates her to something that is just the ache that she can breathe through as she struggles to survive in the midst of it day by day. Like, devote more time to her and her kids, her trying to go back to work, the brief moments when she forgets that Mark is truly gone and is hit by it all over again but still continues to work, the guilt she feels about having to leave her kids to the nanny while she has to work. And before you say, but Noria, we did get that within the film, though, my point is that this should have been more of the focus of the movie, because I think the most heartfelt part of the entire film is that it is such a brilliant study on grief and how we try to move on and live with the ghost left behind. And although we do get parts of that, the film tries to 50-50 it with the romance, because ultimately Bridget Jones needs to be a romance, and that is such an unnecessary bit that it just makes me want to yank on my hair and scream. And what makes it worse is the third issue I have with the film, which is that Bridget Jones Mad About the Boy does the stereotypical thing, which is trying to force the Bridget Jones love triangle. Like, for real, is it a Bridget Jones movie if there's no unnecessary love triangle that needs to be tossed into the mix? Like, I get it. The Daniel versus Mark thing was maybe cute in the first film, but after the first film, it became absolutely unnecessary, and yet they kept driving it in. Even after we got the proposal at the end of the second film, we still had to deal with the love triangle in the third one because, of course, Bridget and Mark broke up in between. And whilst we all collectively thought that we had gotten our happy ever after with the film, turns out that it was all wishful thinking, as now Mark Darcy is dead. And instead of the film just focusing on Bridget's relationship with Scott and show us how Billy slowly comes around to accepting that even if he does get a stepfather, his father will still be with him and will still matter, and the family would never forget Mark Darcy. Instead of getting that, we had to waste about an hour on things with Rockstar that was absolutely unnecessary and just took away from the time that could have been better served to us focusing on Bridget's exploration of her grief and having to slowly come around to falling in love with someone new now that Mark's gone, and her children's slow acceptance of this reality. I realized that part of the reason why I was not as big of a fan of Bridget's romance with Mark in the previous films was that we never really did get to see the romance. We didn't get to really sink into that in the first film because way too much of the time in the film was spent on Bridget being with Daniel, the man that was most certainly not endgame for her, than it was on the time she did spend with Mark, who was the actual endgame. And the same issue was repeated in Bridget Jones Mad About the Boy. We legit saw Bridget's romance with Rockstar. We got to see them slowly falling in love and spending time together, going on dates, and yet he was not endgame. The person who's actually endgame, we got maybe the last 20 minutes of the film's runtime. It makes zero sense and just has me screaming because, what? Chiwetel Ejiofor does I Am Utterly Lost in You and so besotted with you so goddamn well And I don't know about you, but I feel absolutely cheated that we did not get enough of that, because this entire movie franchise doesn't actually understand how balance in a romantic comedy works. And I don't know about you, but I find that to be a big problem. But of course, that's just me and my thoughts. I would, as always, love to hear yours. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Please let me know your response and thoughts in the comments. Like this video if you've watched this far and haven't done so yet. Share this if you want. Support me on Patreon if you can. If you cannot, however, consider checking out my other channels. I have a channel dedicated to me playing video games, if that's more your thing, or if you're one of the people who finds my voice soothing, you can check out my ASMR channel for more content. I have the links to all of them in the description box, so do check it out. And until tomorrow's video, do remember, obsessing over the things you love, perfectly valid coping mechanism.